Hey, so good afternoon, everyone. This is Sanjeev Mota from B&K Securities. On behalf of B&K, I welcome you all to another session of our Fireside chat. We have a very interesting speaker today. We have Mr. Ajay Patil, CFO of Cummins India. I'm sure everybody knows him pretty well, but before joining Cummins, Ajay was in the US. He was the CFO of America Honeywell Building Solutions Company based in Minneapolis. Long industry experience in various engineering fields. I have had a privilege to chat with him a few times and always been very, very interesting conversations. Welcome, Ajay, to this fireside chat. So we also have our head of capital goods sector, Kunal. So Ajay, I understand that we have 45 minutes, right? You have somewhere to go. So what we'll do is we'll kind of restrict ourselves mostly to macro and strategic questions. And I guess we'll take it from there. And I promise not to ask you about the merger of unlisted arm. Yes.
No, you can still ask me. There's no challenge there. But would it be okay, Sanjeev, if I just take maybe 5 minutes to provide my opening comments? Maybe there is a good possibility that some of the questions you people might have get addressed to the. Would that be
Sure.
okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, just to others, any participant has any questions, please put it in the Q&A box or chat box, and we'll make sure that we ask that question. All right, please go ahead, Ajay.
Perfect. All right. So again, thank you, Sanjeev, for inviting me, and good afternoon to all of you. Also joining me on this call is our treasurer, Abhijit Sarkar, just for you to know. So before I get into the details of factors impacting Cummins India's businesses, starting off with the broader economic and other parameters, I think the more important thing is to look at where the COVID-19 is currently there. And then from India perspective, I think with the pace of vaccination that is picking up, there are days when it goes up about 1 crore of doses being dispensed. I think that is very encouraging. Now, whether we have a potential third wave, time will tell. But the country, broadly speaking, both physically and psychologically, seems slightly better prepared than the wave two. On business and economic front, I think we continue to see a sequential growth in our key end markets, be it infrastructure, commercial real estate, data centers, manufacturing, or rentals. And we are also observing signs of maybe early signs of private capex starting in a small way. When you take that along with the government's spend on infrastructure, I think it's broadly speaking a good story from an economic recovery perspective. Domestic demand within that continues to show some signs of improvement as economic activities are getting back to normal. Export markets continue to show some steady demand. There are market specific trends though, for example, Middle East, Africa, Latin America. These regions who are dependent on natural resources are experiencing that commodity price increases as well as the return to economic activities, which are good for them just because it increased their economic health. While the developed economies like US, Europe have continued to rebound relatively quickly simply because of a strong vaccination in those economies. While US continues to grapple with the uh, you know Delta variant, what I read this morning was about 160,000 cases per day in the US. So which is pretty significant and going back to the same level of what it had experienced in the wave two or wave one. From a Cummins India perspective, I think we continue to look at our employees and their safety as a number one priority. As a company or as a group in India, we have so far dispensed 25,000 doses to our employees and their families. And our vaccination drive is going on as we speak. Our operations, on the other hand, are working normally with the manned capacity averaging to about 90% or higher. Supply chain disruptions caused by the second wave is now slowly returning to a level of normalcy as we see our suppliers getting to a level of manned capacity of what they had before. Having said, I think the imported supplies, especially when it comes to semiconductors and electronic components, continues to have a challenge because of the global constraints on capacity. Uh, from our perspective, because we are part of a global integrated supply chain, That sometimes helps us a lot in terms of getting the appropriate allocations relative to our demand. So while we can say that we are still in a constrained environment, but we are somehow managing our semiconductor electronic supplies such that we are not missing shipments in a very significant way. Similarly, the lead times, reordering levels, building safety stocks for such item continues to be a challenge. And we do foresee that the semiconductor electronic components or chip supplies will remain constrained through the rest of the year and may stretch into 2022 as well. On the logistics side, especially when it comes to the month or a quarter end, we do see some crunch on availability of containers, which is a function of how the turnaround cycle of containers is getting impacted with multiple disruption at critical international ports, more recently being Ningbo in China as an example. The other data point for us has been commodity cost increases, which has been the feature for last several months. We definitely are experiencing that, which is pushing our input cost higher. In order to counter it, we have been taking a dual measure of working our pricing actions on one side, as well as taking a look at our cost reduction initiatives. We have a very structured and matured material cost reduction programs because the nature of our product is such that every change to our product requires a robust testing before the new parts can be put onto manufacturing lines, and therefore our cost reduction efforts are very programmatic and are very structured in terms of how they are done. And lastly, as I kind of round up the conversation, I think over the last few months we have been continuing to sort of launch new products in our power generation, industrial and distribution businesses. These products are offering the trusted Cummins technologies and continues to differentiate Cummins offerings, both in terms of how the power density, the footprint reduction, the power to weight ratios, and some of the critical criteria the customer look at. And we continue to leverage our strong forte in application engineering and backed up with our world-class local manufacturing capabilities and a strong service network. You would have seen we launched recently a QSK 60G23. This is a 2 megawatt locally manufactured genset. This is for the first time in India, a genset of this kind is getting locally manufactured. And we also have launched several products for our exports market as well, notably the FMUL, fire pump for DG sets for rental markets, etc. So in summary, we remain very optimistic about the economic recovery in our domestic and export market on a sequential basis. I know I kind of spoke a little fast, Sanjeev, but I thought of putting the context.
I think that's great. I think you've covered the current scenario pretty well, and I guess what we will kind of focus on is more strategic and long term. And then if anybody, if we have time, we'll come back to some of the current issues. But just just start with in terms of the new power initiatives that is the global, your parent has kind of taken in terms of what's going on. Where does India stand there? How would this translate into what is happening in Cummins India?
So when you talk about new power, we are talking about a variety of different technology options when it comes to having clean fuel.
Yeah.
And the push in that direction is happening primarily because of number of countries have signed to the Paris Protocol. India is one of the signatory. US has re-signed it. So it has got the muscle of developed nations behind it. So which would mean that it will get pushed. And India is showing really some very, very decisive steps in terms of moving in that direction. You would have seen the launch of BS6 on April 1st, 2020, bang in the middle of pandemic. They did not move the date for getting the BS6 on highway emissions implemented. They implemented the BS4 CEV. These are for the off-highway equipment from April 1st, 2021. They pushed it out by 6 months, though. It was supposed to be October 20. They pushed it out to April. And now what is coming up is a CPCB 4 Plus for the standby stationary application like a genset. The date was July 21. Whatever we hear from different sources, it does seem like it will get pushed out in 2022. Whether it's middle of 22 or end of 22, I think time will tell. But broadly seems more like end of the 22. But these are significant changes relative to the emission standards in the country. And I say significant for 2-3 reasons. One, historically, the emission standards were measured based on you ship the product out of the factory and that's it. your obligation gets over. Now BS6, when you look at it today, come 2023, there will be new standards which is called onboard diagnostics 2.
Right.
When that gets implemented, it's a dynamic measurement of emissions, which would mean any truck will get stopped on the road. The ARAI Institute, which is in Pune, incidentally, they would have mobile testing equipment. They will go and check whether on a dynamic basis, real time, whether that particular vehicle is meeting the standards or not. If not, they will there and there note it, and based on the statistics, and I think the statistics is pretty low. If it's something like 3% of the sample collected indicates that the standards have not been met, will result into a recall.
Right.
And so likewise, so when you look at this is happening on one side, the push to renewable is happening on the other side. More spoken is hydrogen, because when you look at a really long-term mega trend, that seems to be the fuel, which seems to be the solution for solving environmental concerns. Hydrogen as a fuel is not new. It's there for a period of time in smaller measures. It is being used. But in the recent times, what Cummins has done is that it acquired some niche companies into that particular space, Hydrogenic being one such company. And that has accelerated our offerings when it comes to making green hydrogen. Recently, about 2 or 3 months ago, Cummins announced setting up of a gigafactory in Spain.
Yeah.
It's a 500 megawatt facility for making green hydrogen, and it has set up the capacity of electrolyzers, which will break water into hydrogen and oxygen. And that hydrogen will be used for multitude of applications. So when you put this in the background and look at India, what's going to happen is that the government and the Prime Minister spoke about in his address on 15th of August, setting up a green hydrogen mission, which means the government is thinking about it. The key is going to be how quickly the demonstrators or early prototypes get implemented. Sooner they get implemented, greater is the opportunity to look at the adoption in the country. The opportunity application is just immense. You look at segments like cement, steel, oil and gas, fertilizer. They're massive industry, what we call in India core industries from an economy standpoint. One interesting aspect of this is also going to be, when you crack water and separate hydrogen and oxygen, along the way you also have a ability to generate ammonia. In an Indian context, usage of fertilizer per acre is relatively less compared to developed country. And therefore, that also finds a way to get that ammonia diverted for manufacturing fertilizers. So when you keep all of this and look at where Cummins stands, clearly we have the access to technology. Definitely, like rest of the world, we are also learning about these technologies. We are also trying to make these technologies affordable. We are also trying to make these technologies commercially viable. So it will go through that evolution. But you look at the companies who are at the forefront, we are one of them. So therefore, should there be an interest from any of the Indian, customers or government to come forward and, put some of these electrolyzer plants and manufacture hydrogen, store hydrogen, we will be ready. We have the capacity, we have the technology to make it. We have the technology to store it, because storing of hydrogen is, equally critical from a safety standpoint, because it's a highly combustible gas. So therefore, transportation and storage is of, very, very high safety requirement there. So we feel good about, in terms of these different trends that are coming out.
So I was reading that in Austria, there was the first train, right, which like you along with Alstom, right, did this hydrogen powered train, and it has actually been a successful run and so on. And I think Indian government has also launched a tender recently or something like that. So couple of questions here. Would you be participating in things like that because you have an experience of this train? In fact, even in your, if you look at your global website, one of the things that they say that how rail can actually be the first mover in hydrogen because of various reasons. And So is that a big opportunity again, given what Prime Minister has said and all that? That's one. But I also have a side question on this. Who will get it within India? Again, sorry, but this is is it Cummins India listed entity or the unlisted one? So that's more from an investor perspective, but uh, as a whole, if you can answer these two in a way.
Definitely, would that technology be available in India? The answer is yes. Would that technology be routed through the listed arm? We have been maintaining a very clear delineation between a listed and unlisted entities portfolio. All of us have to remember that the listed entity is in existence for more than 3-4 decades, and a portfolio of businesses which are part of listed entity continues to grow. Like for example, I mentioned about some of the product launches. How do we make those launches? CPCB 4 Plus is going to come. How are we going to get the technology to migrate from current BS2 standard to BS4 standard, as an example? So the listed entity is not going to get deprived of. What we are very clear is that the end markets and the application and the customers which are supported by the listed entity. And for example, you talked about railways. Railways is a critical part of the listed entity's business. You look at even today. So if should Indian Railways float a tender to say we would like to do this, and it gets to a commercial scale, we certainly would have that, going through the listed entity.
Right. But do you see railway in India as from hydrogen, from whatever you are hearing, as a big opportunity? At least, if not now, 2-3 years down the line, what are you kind of sensing?
I think clearly what is going to happen, the way I see it, I'm not a technocrat, but the way I read and see things is clearly about the greater emphasis will be creating a capacity for green hydrogen. So which would mean that when you put an electrolyzer, the source of power has to be green. If you use, let us say, electricity to split hydrogen and oxygen, and that electricity is coming from a thermal source, then it is really not a green hydrogen per se.
Yeah.
But if it is coming from a renewable source, then it is a green hydrogen, because you can take solar or wind. And that is where you see a lot of excitement and a lot of talk from bigger companies also about setting up those, global scale solar farms, global scale wind farms, primarily because that energy is going to get channelized towards making green hydrogen, because that is where you get the full advantage of having quote unquote a green hydrogen per se. So therefore, in an Indian context, I would say in the initial part, in my mind, there'll be multiple applications which will get developed. For example, recently Indian Oil floated a tender for, I think, 30 or 40 buses which will run on hydrogen. Similarly, maybe Indian Railways will do. See, hydrogen as a fuel, in my mind, is really well suited in a country like India's railway network. When you look at routes like Mumbai Pune, it's like a 2.5-3 hours drive. You look at Mumbai Ahmedabad, you look at Mumbai Baroda. Well, likewise, there are a number of such short distances, Hyderabad Vijayawada, for example. Likewise, this is where I think railways will try and experiment first, because these are short haul, uh, and these are primarily, lesser uh, capacity trains relative to those big trains which run long distance. So definitely railways will be one early adopter. Oil companies will be the second ones which will adopt, because they have access to hydrogen themselves, because during the process of crude cracking, they can generate hydrogen as well. So that is how I see it, Sanjeev.
Right. But just trying to understand, in your core business, you have, you are known, you know, you have the technology which is like long developed. Here, as you said, you are also learning globally, and it's something new. So, someone like Reliance who's kind of announced that we are getting into this and stuff, do you see yourself as like partnering with Reliance, so you'll be a competitor to Reliance? I know it's too early days to kind of say anything, but your guess in terms of what is your edge, competitive edge that you bring on table?
So clearly our play is going to be technology and application engineering, because that is where our forte has been. Historically, if you look at it for the last 100 years, we as a company focused on one product, which is diesel engine.
Right.
But using that as a prime source of power, we created a variety of very successful and robust applications, whether it is for gensets or excavators or for on highway or off highway, industrial applications, mining applications, marine applications, construction application. But if you look at the back end, the prime source is just an engine. But how you use that engine and create an application, that's the kind of a success we had. You asked a question of partnership. If you look at our website and you might see the interview of our CEO on the Jim Cramer Mad Money, and he says we are looking for partners. We are looking for, because I don't think there is one company which can do it. If you ask me, it's going to be an effort which is going to be a collaborative effort to create that ecosystem. And therefore, I think as a company, our CEO was very candid about saying that we need to partner with people.
Right. Sure. The second thing in terms of this Make in India, and you all have talked about, you just talked about in your initial comments about the engine that you've made here now. And in fact, from what I understand, even currently China imports the same thing from UK. And, so is now with this point, obviously you are being able to do it cost effective way. Are you able to do more things which you can actually, given the India itself has a good base, that your exports in things like that, is there a big opportunity?
No doubt. I mean, the product that I mentioned, which is a 2 megawatt product, that's a product we export today to China and developed countries. Even today, for example, we export it, and it's a very robust product. It's a product which is primarily goes into critical infrastructure, be it like a data center or an airport or a big manufacturing campus or even military installations where you require that kind of reliable source of power. And we believe the kind of engine technology that we have, the kind of compact engine that we have managed to design and develop and manufacture, it actually solves a lot of customers' problem because it's a relatively compact engine which provides that magnitude of power.
Right. But overall, just to understand, again, taking the macro context of Make in India and where Cummins is, and you are one of the three manufacturing parts in the whole Cummins world, right? I guess it's US, China, and here. How do you see this evolve as, again, just trying to take the Make in India and looking at Cummins, where are you? What do you think? Just trying to put
So
it.
we operate as an integrated supply chain. So,
right.
And all our plants are quote unquote source approved, which means if you source from UK, the same product you source from India, from an engineering perspective, from a manufacturing perspective, they are all at the same level because they are all tested and certified. And depending on the global capacity, depending on how the demand is, our ability to flex the volume across these plants is relatively strong compared to any other company. Number two, India being obviously, when you look at the key criteria of cost, quality, delivery, we score and we are very competitive. And therefore, we do believe that some of these larger engines which we make here will continue to have strong demand from Europe, developed countries, and including China.
Right. Sure. And also, I was listening to your earnings call, and where you all kind of mentioned about some of the OEs actually now moving to India and manufacturing in India, like a Hyundai or so on, for exports more and more. So, is that also something that, like, in terms of size, it can be reasonably large size opportunity?
Yeah, see, when you look at our comment about Hyundai was more about the construction equipment arm of Hyundai. We are not in passenger car, as you know.
You talked about Hitachi, Hyundai, all these construction equipment companies.
So what is happening is that very similar to the way our manufacturing has matured, their local manufacturing has matured to a world-class level. And now they want to leverage the economies of scale that they have in India to export for their own markets. So definitely, as they look at their local manufacturing go up, obviously from an engine manufacturing perspective, we are a local source. So they buy local and they export.
Right.
So that's the way it is. So obviously they have a significant advantage relative to their internal plants because engine is coming from India.
Right. So you talked about data centers as one of the things that you're supplying to. How big is that opportunity? Just as a macro sense in India, and what is your play there? Like, one of the things obviously is that gensets now from a power generating thing in India, which was the main thing, is now moved more as a backup. And I think that's a huge potential demand for that also now from backup. So, just kind of putting from a data center perspective and other application perspective, if you can talk a bit about that whole opportunity.
So I'll give you some data points. All of us are analysts, so we love some information and data. So I'll talk a little data. So at a macro level, when you look at in India, our current because the way data centers are measured, they are measured in installed capacity of megawatts.
That's it.
So currently the operational capacity in India is approximately 650 megawatt or thereabout. With 700 million mobile users in the country who have access to internet. That's the second data point. When you compare that with Europe, 400 million population from a mobile usage perspective, the installed capacity of data center is 8,500 megawatts. Okay, so when you look at these three data points and then look at what is happening in India, the extent of e-commerce adoption, the comfort with which people are comfortable to buy online, the extent with which the banks are pushing digitization, the extent with which all financial services are pushing digitization, couple that with the fact the in-country data requirement regulations that every country is putting in place would mean that the need for retaining data in India will be high. The need for providing digital services would mean that you require a very strong backup. You remember, last year, Reserve Bank of India pulled HDFC Bank for, their credit card services were not that robust, and they stopped their credit card issuance till the time they get their backend in place from an IT and other infrastructure perspective. So when you look at some such actions, we believe that, the data centers operate with, tier of reliability. So tier 1 could be 99.1%, while tier 4 could be 99.9947%. So you can look at the level of sensitivity they apply. So that tier parameter indicates the level of uptime that data center has to guarantee.
Right.
And when you look at a data center per se, another data point for you is when you look at data center investment, and if you take the client's equipment out, you take the servers and the IT equipment out of it, and treat that data center investment as 100. Typically, a genset would cost somewhere close to about 10 to 14% of the project cost as a backup power. But on an operating expense, power constitutes about 35 to 40% of operating expense, because the cooling cost of keeping the data center to a level of, because it's all servers which are running, and the operating cost of the data center, it constitutes 40%. And therefore, when you look at the reliability factor on one side, you need a backup power, which may be, to your point, it is standby, but it need to be ready when it is needed the most, so that the data center is able to deliver its reliability, which is 99 point something something. So when you put all these multiple data points together, look at the extent of installed capacity that we have. And if you believe different reports, I was reading some report which kind of forecasted investment of somewhere close to 10 billion US dollars. Now, whether it is true or false, I'm not in a position to make an assessment, but it's just a report which made an estimate. So if there is a $10 billion investment coming up in the next 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, 48 months, we're talking about a significant ramp up in capacity. And already, if you come on the outskirts of Mumbai, come into Navi Mumbai, that has become like a data center capital. The amount of, and same thing is happening in Gurgaon. Same thing is happening in not Gurgaon, but more so Noida, Hyderabad, Chennai. Everyone is attracting this because it's a up and coming requirement. I mean, it will become a critical infrastructure, and it is a critical infrastructure. So when you put this in context, the growth opportunity for that end market is pretty significant. And mind you, this plays into the strength of us, because these are all high horsepower engines. These are all 750, 850, 1000 kVA, 1500 kVA, 2000 kVA, 2500 kVA, 3000 kVA. So these are all those 0.7 to 3 megawatt kind of engines. These are like massive machines.
And but what about other than data centers in terms of gensets? Where else are you seeing? So things like medical facilities and so on. So where all? How big is this opportunity other than data center?
So when you look at the end markets for gensets, what are we looking at? So data center we talked about. The opportunity is enormous. Infrastructure is another big one. When the government is constructing about 25 to 30 kilometers of highways on a daily basis, genset constitutes a critical part into that process.
Right.
When you look at the privatization of ports, airports, new constructions coming, that's a critical one when you look at infrastructure as one end market. When you look at healthcare, setting up of COVID related facilities or hospitals, again, that's another exciting end market. When you look at rental business, that's another interesting end market for us as well. Commercial real estate, believe it or not, there was a lot of talk about commercial real estate, but what I'm observing is that the ongoing projects are getting over, they are getting completed. Similarly, logistics, the amount of warehouses and fulfillment centers that would be needed for each of these e-commerce play. And e-commerce is now not restricted only to the Amazons of the world. Even other companies are using e-commerce as a means of reaching to their customers because people prefer that nowadays. So you look at groceries, for example, or you look at textile. All of these can be bought online today. So if you have to do those, you need to have in the backend fulfillment center and warehouse infrastructure. Similarly, residential is one other area where from a real estate point of view. Agriculture is one where you look at aqua farms and so on and so forth. So you look at practically every segment of economy is something which is of interest to us. And therefore, while there is a thematic growth which might happen to something like a data center, for example, which will show some explosive growth, but we will be in that sense tied up to the broader GDP growth across economies. If the GDP is forecasted to grow by 9 to 11%, and on a sustainable basis, let's say by 7 to 8%, our endeavor is to always work for outperforming the GDP.
Right. But how does emission and and even environmental play into this in this whole genset game? So are you able to do and plus in terms of competitive intensity, what is going on there? Given that you're talking about such a big opportunity, what kind of competitive intensity and in terms of environment, are you able to kind of do things which are better because just you have the technology and you're able to do things better? Maybe you can just talk about that.
Absolutely. I think whenever the emission standards have gone up, or whenever we have transitioned from one emission to the next one, it is something which has always worked in favor of Cummins simply because of the access to technology that we have. What is happening from BS2 to BS4 when it comes to genset? We are moving essentially from mechanical engines to electronic engines. Why electronic engines? Because you need precise fuel injections. You need precise combustion of fuel. You need precise exhaust management in order for you to comply. And I'll just give you a sense of what is changing. The oxides of nitrogen or NOx and particulate matter, the reduction compared to BS2 to BS4 is going to be 90%. So we are not talking incremental changes. We are talking a step change. And therefore, for the competitors to bring out products which will meet requirements both in letter and spirit of law is going to be that much more harder, would mean significant spend on the capital expenditure on product development as well as for manufacturing. And when you look at us from a access to technology, in country, on ground, world class manufacturing that we have, in country, world class engineering capabilities that we have, as well as the brand and the market position that we have, we feel we have, we are ready to participate and meet the standards. And we already have demonstrated technologies. The on highway engines are already running. There are more than 100,000 engines already on the road with the new BS6 standards, which are working well. So these factors, when you put this together, we believe we have the product and we have the technology, and we are ready in terms of whenever the government makes the announcement.
So what kind of market share do you think you can capture? Just ballpark,
Hard for me to put any figure there in terms of saying what kind of a market presence we would have in a new environment, because when the new emissions come, in what shape and form they come and how it shapes out the competitive landscape, I think would determine. But we very strongly believe and we are very confident that we'll be able to retain, if not increase, relative to where we stand on the market presence.
right? In terms of emission norms, where are we? I know the developed countries are a bit ahead of us, but overall, where are we in India relative to many other places? The reason I'm asking this question is again from an exports perspective, and I think I remember having a conversation with you a few months ago where you talked about how some of the two-wheelers companies are actually getting a collateral benefit of strict emission norms, and they are able to export, you know, much more, the Bajajes and the TVSs of the day. So again, I'm trying to put it in Cummins context that, are we then able to develop things here which we are then able to export given where we are in the emission norms?
Interestingly, Sanjeev, when we look at the stationary application like a genset, India would be leading the emissions compared to other developed countries.
Oh.
So when you look at that, you can just simply imagine the extent of readiness we will have. So as soon as those export markets starts to migrate to these standards, by that time we will be already ahead with a product proven in a country like India, which by itself is, challenging. So if something which can work in India possibly can work anywhere else. So to that extent, we believe that it's a big step up for us, and we are grateful that the government has taken this step, because it will actually help us be ahead of the market with these new emission standards.
Right. So if I put it all together and just look at the product portfolio that we have, and market, or at least the stock market, always seems to be worried about certain things that are going to go out of fashion suddenly, and electric vehicles come and then two-wheeler stocks don't do well because feel that everything will become two-wheeler, everything will become electric very soon. If I look at the portfolio that Cummins has, and if you think of it as what can get disrupted because of EVs, and have you order change in technology, what do you think? What's your, what is the internal view on this? If I look at the overall product portfolio and then try and break it up into segments.
So you look at our business, right? So we call power generation or diesel generating set business. We have an industrial portfolio, which is primarily construction, railways, compressors, mining, marine. We have our services business. So when you look at this as a portfolio, and when you look at some of these mega trends, saying tomorrow, how do we get into cleaner fuel as an example? Now the diesel itself is getting cleaned so much, right? So therefore the alternate fuels have to compete that much more harder, because diesel technologies are growing that quickly in terms of providing a cleaner exhaust out of a diesel combustion, right? That is number one. Gas, in my mind, would be an interesting space to watch, just because of the access to gas for some of the key industries that we look at. The key component of development of gas in the country and its use into gensets could be one interesting factor to watch. We have the technology. There is no one in. There are very few companies who can have a diesel genset. We are one of them. And you look at the broader policy direction from government, like you look at the city gas distribution focus the government has. Now, if the government is pushing for city gas distribution, which would mean the gas coming into our homes for cooking purposes, that means the reliability of supply and the onus of reliability is on the government, and their confidence of ensuring the supply, that they will be able to provide a sustainably long period, a continuous supply of gas, would mean that they are confident of gas supplies. And should there be an infrastructure for storing, distributing the gas in an efficient manner, it will find end use relatively quickly. Like for example, if a gas can come to your and my home for cooking purposes, the same gas can go into an industrial application also. So that's an interesting space to watch in terms of a trend. And then of course the cleaner fuel, as and when they come, a fuel cell, for example, could be one such example where we will see how technology evolves. But when you put all of these things together and take a step back and see, a genset will continue to be a requirement in any critical infrastructure, whether it is a hotel or a hospital or an airport or a data center or a commercial building or a residential building. You would require a backup power. You may use it less as the grid power reliability continues to improve. You may use it less, but you can't eliminate it. So that way the profile of how you make money, how does your offerings change on your service side, your parts replacement side, those commercial models will undergo changes as we go forward.
Right.
But I think a need for a backup power will remain for a considerably long period of time, unless something like a wireless electricity or those kind of things starts to come in. So
Right. Sure. So last question, I know we are running out of time. If I look at now Cummins 5 years down the line, and there was comments in the AGM also about 100, at least the endeavor to improve margins by 100 bips every year, and is not a guidance that it was said, it's more like an endeavor. But if I were to look at, if I look at the size of the company, do you look at double digits growth, improvement in margin, and what kind of product portfolio, given that the product portfolio itself would drive the margins, right? The way you're saying. So just 5 years down the line, how do you look at this company? How would the company look like?
I would say the way we are thinking about it, the way we are working it today, I think you will find us, at least that's what all of us are working every day. You'll find us a company with a very strong balance sheet, which we already have a very strong balance sheet. My endeavor is personally to keep it even stronger. Don't know 5 years down the line whether I'll be around or not, but at least I'll leave a legacy of a strong balance sheet, certainly. Number two, you'll find a company which delivers to its promise. If we are saying something, we will do exactly the same thing in spirit as well as in the letter of our promise. Number three, from any changes which are impacting environment, any changes which are impacting generation of power, any changes which are impacting application engineering, you will find us at the forefront the way we are today. So 5 years down the line, you will find us the way you find us today, as a premier company in our own space.
Right. Okay, sir, there's one question, if it's okay, one last question. So
Yeah,
any visibility on orders from mining sector? Is there any improvement in that?
I think so. I mean, on mining, especially in the recent times, what I have been seeing is a, a shift in some of the equipment procurement. Right. For example, usually you will have a 60-ton dump truck, because our contribution in mining is in the form of providing engine for the mining equipment. So the dump trucks is one of the big things because they haul the iron ore from the mines. So I have seen that going up to 60 to 90 tons, even to 100, 110 tons, and even higher. And mind you, these are not small machines. It may sound, oh, okay, 60 to 90, but when you look at the size of the truck, possibly if you stand there, the wheel will be taller than you and I put together. So these are big equipment. So I have seen that one trend. The order velocity is showing some pickup, which would mean that the capex and the confidence of capex into the sector seems to be coming back. Number three, the privatization and the speed with which some of the block allotment is happening, I think that is giving some encouragement for private capital to come into the sector. So when you put all these points together, I think it will get onto a cycle of growth. But always you have to remember that it's a very niche end market. It's not a mass market just by the
Yeah.
nature of equipment. So if you keep that in your mind, then you can calibrate your assessment for the end market.
Sure. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we had only 45 minutes. We can talk to you about every sector, since you are, as you said, you are covering all the sectors, and it's amazing to get your insights on that. So maybe at some point we'll reconnect and discuss a bit more. Thank you very much, and I think it's great, and all the very best for all the goals that you all have.
Thank you so much, Sanjeev, for inviting us. Pleasure speaking with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajay sir.
Thank you. Bye bye.